We don't often do the translation. Krishna is the lover of Radharani. He displays many amorous pastimes in the groves of Vrindavan. He is the lover of the cowherd maidens of Braj, the holder of the great hill named Govardhana, the beloved son of Mother Jasoda, and the delighter of the inhabitants of Braj. And he wanders in the forests along the banks of the river Jamuna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Agnatimanandascha Kananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Dena Tajmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So we're reading from Canto 3, Chapter 21, and it's Text 2. Priyavrato Tanapado Priyavrato Tanapado Sutto Swayambhuvasya Vai Sutto Swayambhuvasya Vai Jatadamam Jugupatu Jatadamam Jugupatu Sapta Dvipavatim Mahim Sapta Dvipavatim Mahim Priyavrato Tanupado Sutto Swayambhuvasya Vai Jatadamam Jugutpatu Sapta Dvipavatim Mahim Priyavrato Tanapado Sutto Swayambhuvasya Vai Jatadamam Jugupatu Sapta Dvipavatim Mahim Priyavrato Tanapado Sutto Swayambhuvasya Vai Jatadamam Jugutpatu Sapta Dvipavatim Mahim. Ladies? Priyavrata, Maharaj Priyavrata, Uttanapado, and Maharaj Uttanapada. Sutto, the two sons, Swayambhuvasya, of Swayambhuva Manu, Vai, indeed, and Jata, according to Dharmam, religious principles, Jugutpatuhu, ruled, Saptadvipa Vatim, consisting of 7 islands, Mahim, the world. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. The two great sons of Swayambhuva Manu, Priyavrata and Uttanapada, ruled the world, consisting of 7 islands, just according to religious principles. Responsively, the two great sons of Swayambhuva Manu, Priyavrata and Uttanapada, ruled the world, consisting of 7 islands, just according to religious principles. purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srimad Bhagavatam is also a history of the great rulers of different parts of the universe. In this verse, the names Priyavrata and Uttanapada, sons of Swayambhuva, are mentioned. They ruled this earth, which is divided into 7 islands. These 7 islands are still current, as Asia, Europe, Africa, America, Australia, and the North and South Poles. There is no chronological history of all the Indian kings in the Srimad Bhagavatam, but the deeds of the most important kings, such as Priyavrata and Uttanapada, and many others like Lord Ramachandra and Maharaj Yudhisthira, are recorded because the activities of such pious kings are worth hearing. People may benefit by studying their histories. This is the first time I've ever noticed that Australia gets a mention in the Bhagavatam. So the Srimad Bhagavatam, as we've heard, is the history of the Supreme Lord, but together with his devotees. The great authorities in our line have described that the Supreme Lord has unlimited qualities and unlimited pastimes. The Supreme does not exist in a vacuum. I remember back in the 70s particularly, sometimes you would see a painting of Krishna and he was like sitting on an Om sign or something like that. Or he was depicted in some sort of airbrushed weird background. But Prabhupada warned us that these sorts of images are bogus. Krishna's pastimes are carried out in relationship with his devotees. Like we've mentioned in today's verse, we're talking of not only the Supreme Lord, but we're talking of devotees of the Supreme Lord. For Vaishnavas, the Supreme Lord or the Supreme Absolute Truth is full of qualities and activities. It's not a void. And the pastimes of his devotees are full of richness. I was thinking the Bhagavatam is really interesting in that the characters that it portrays are not two-dimensional. Like this is a good guy, that's a bad guy. They're often, isn't it, that the bad guy has some good qualities and that the great heroes and the saints that we're talking about, they struggle with things. Like, for example, Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, the whole essence of the Gita is Arjuna's struggle to understand what is his duty. And their weaknesses also, like, for example, we're going to hear about Maharaj Uttanapada, who is the father of Dhruva. And that whole pastime with Dhruva Maharaj sort of comes about because of Uttanapada's weakness or his particular attraction to one of his queens. He was overly attached. He couldn't see Dhruva as being equal. I'm shedding flower petals here at a great rate. Or devotees of great elevated consciousness, like we hear of Queen Kunti, top level of consciousness, or Prahlad Maharaj, one of the great heroes. So hearing about these devotees advances our consciousness. In Vidura, of course, we're talking of these verses. Vidura is one of these great devotees. Today's verse about the 2 sons of Swayambhuva Manu comes about because Vidura questioned the sage about the offspring of Swayambhuva. So I was thinking, so why is the Bhagavatam relating this conversation that involves Vidura, a great sage, a great devotee of the Lord, and someone whose footsteps we should follow in? Why is he inquiring? There he is in front of Maitreya, another great sage. Why is he inquiring from Maitreya about a particular dynasty, like in the verse that Devaki gave the other day? Vidura says that the line of Swayambhuva was most esteemed. O worshipful sage, I beg you, give me an account of this race whose progeny multiplied through sexual intercourse. So, why would Vidura be asking of Maitreya this question? Why is he concerned with how they reproduce? In the previous purport, Prabhupada says, Vidura was not actually interested in the history of persons who merely engaged in sex life. Sort of, oh yeah? That's going on all over the world, and there's no great lesson to be had in the positive sense. But Vidura says, please give me an account of this race, starting with Swayambhuva and his wife Satarupa, whose progeny multiplied through sexual intercourse. When I was thinking of this class, I'm sort of glad there are no kids here, that in case it's sort of like a PG thing where we're talking of sexual relationships. But the Bhagavatam doesn't shy away from it. It's like, I was thinking, things that are kept in the dark, the saying goes, they fester. So the Bhagavatam's right up front, that sex is part of our condition, it's part of human life, and it's another way that Krishna can be served, or we can become attached. In the we understand from the Bhagavatam that sexual reproduction, it's not the only way that living entities are reproduced. In the description of creation, Lord Vishnu impregnates the living entities into the Mahatattva. How does he do it? Padma? Do you know? Lord Vishnu, he impregnates the living entities into the Mahatattva. He does it simply just by glancing over. Or Lord Brahma, he can also reproduce by subtle means. It describes, while Brahma was absorbed in contemplation and was observing the supernatural power, I'm not sure what that means, but two other forms were just generated out of his body. One became male, one turns into a male, one turns into a female. And these two forms become Swayambhuva Manu and his wife Satarupa. Very mystical. So again, why does Vidura concern himself with the offspring of Swayambhuva? At this point in the Bhagavatam, we understand Dhruva has left the palace and he's gone on pilgrimage. And first he meets with the great devotee Uddhava, and they have talks, but Uddhava directs him, you should inquire from Maitreya, because Vidura at this point is quite elderly. So as a matter of etiquette, Uddhava encourages him, go and talk to Maitreya, who's elderly. So sex life is mentioned here, that they reproduced by sexual intercourse. In the Bhagavatam, in the 5th canto, mundane sex desire is described as the basic principle that is binding all of us to the material existence. It's the basic principle that sexual attraction between male and female is the binding force that can keep us locked into material existence, body after body. Because we identify with our bodies, we're tempted to think that this is who I am, this body. And therefore I'm attracted to other bodily forms. All of this is on the bodily platform. I heard the other day that our skin regenerates about every 2 weeks. So when I'm looking at this form in front of me, I'm looking at something that's going to be different in 2 weeks' time. It's changing before your very eyes. It's described like, the body is described also a bit like a river. Some old philosopher said, you can't put your foot twice into the same river. Because you put your foot there, there's a river there, sure. But an instant later, it's a different river, isn't it? So the body's like that. Even though I'm attached on this bodily platform, I'm looking at something that's changing before my very eyes. And yet we all experience within our lives, there's something that's not changing. isn't it? Every one of us is looking out at the world, and we've been doing that since we're as young as we can remember. And that's not changing. So as long as we're on that platform of trying to achieve satisfaction or pleasure or whatever, in that platform where things are just changing like that, then that constant, the self that's within the body is going to be frustrated. In the previous verse to today, Srila Prabhupada highlights the words parama samataha, which means highly esteemed. That sex life for creating good progeny or exemplary population is accepted, not only accepted, it's highly esteemed by all the great sages and authorities. It's something to be celebrated if sex life is used in the proper way. Swayambhuva Manu and his wife produced 2 sons and 3 daughters, who in turn populated the universe and this planet. Today's verse mentions Priyavrata and Uttanapada, who ruled the world, according to religious principles. I was thinking, we have, you see on the news, there's so many sort of rulers on this planet at the moment. We don't really call them rulers anymore, but they're the heads of countries. They're deciding which way our country's going to go. I was thinking, imagine if each one of those guys or women woke up in the morning and thought, what can I do to benefit everybody, to benefit the population on this planet, all the creatures on this planet? What can I do that would help other living entities? The whole planet would be very different, wouldn't it? You see some of the rulers at the moment, some of the leaders, inverted commas, seem to be sort of just gripped by such short-term, really nasty sort of agendas in a lot of ways. Like you've got an army at your disposal. So to try and get what I want, I'll send my troops off, or a drone, to just blow up a domestic housing block full of women and children. That's going on right now. So it's anything but religious principles. These religious principles that are being talked about have nothing to do with the so-called religions that we hear about, where because of my religion, I'm going to organise to have a school bus blown up, or I'm going to bomb some innocent civilians going about their lives in their apartments. People claim that to be religion, but those principles have nothing to do with what we understand to be spiritual life. Principles of forgiveness, tolerance, mercy, compassion to other living entities. These are the principles of spiritual life, which cut across all religions. The Bhagavatam informs us that this planet and others were populated by great progenitors whose job was to increase population. These descriptions, these progenitors, these originators of the population of our planet, they defy so-called material laws. In Saturday's Charitamrita class, very nicely given by Alananath Prabhu, Lord Chaitanya, it was quoted, anything transcendental, this verse was quoted I think by Lord Chaitanya, anything transcendental to material nature is called inconceivable. Since mundane arguments, or we could say theories, cannot touch transcendental subject matters, one should not try to understand transcendental subjects through mundane arguments or theories. This is actually, it's quoted, it's from the Mahabharata actually. That anything transcendental to material nature is inconceivable. Actually, even in this planet where we live, apparently there are living entities who can reproduce without needing to mate. Hammerhead sharks apparently, Komodo dragons, who would have known? Komodo dragons, salamanders, and an assortment of other fish, reptiles, and even insects, all can reproduce without the need to mate. So there are things even on this planet that seem inconceivable to the sort of material laws that we're told govern everything. So Swayambhuva's progeny was described as Parama Samataha, or actually that creating progeny that is acceptable, according to the religious principles, acceptable to all sages and authorities. In fact, in the Gita, Krishna says, I am that sex life which is not contrary to religious principles. That such progeny created in that consciousness is good for the people in general. Swayambhuva Manu is described as one of the 12 great Mahajans. Great authorities. They're listed as Lord Brahma, Narad, Sambhu, or that's Lord Shiva, the 4 Kumaras, Kapila, Manu, Prahlad, Janaka, Bhishma, Bali, Sukadev, and Yamaraj. Prabhupada points out in this list of these great authorities that we should follow. There are sannyasis, there are brahmacharis, and there are grihastas. So being a Mahajan is not dependent on your ashram. It's depending on the character, the qualities of the person. Prabhupada explains a Mahajan means a personality whose footsteps, whose footprints should be followed. Jana actually, I was reading it, sort of like life or living, and Maha's great, of course. So Prabhupada sort of homes in, he says, to follow a Mahajan means to serve their mission. If one does not follow in the footsteps of the real Mahajans, though, one's plans for happiness will be frustrated, he says. If we don't follow in the footsteps of real great souls, our plans for happiness will be frustrated. Prabhupada mentions real Mahajans as opposed to some others because people put forward their own ideas of who is a great personality. A Mahajan implies, obviously it's a Vedic word, it implies authorized, that this great soul is following in the disciplic succession, following in the other authorities. In the West, we don't use that word Mahajan, but we can see the inclination for people to follow great personalities is still there. Sometimes politicians, in India, sometimes politicians are put forward as being Mahajans or great personalities. Like in the West, we've just had an election in America, and I was thinking, just look at the intensity with which people get involved in that process of electing what they think is going to be a great personality. It's not a casual thing. People invest so much of their life that if we get this personality in place, things are going to be different. And this personality then turns around and says, I'll make America great again. As if anything's going to change. These days, people also worship, like even sports stars who are paid astronomical salaries. Some of the sports stars earn way more than any politician. Entertainers are worshipped. But Prabhupada says, we're sort of warned, following or worshipping these personalities, our plans for happiness based on following this won't bear fruit. That these personalities, like someone who's particularly good at something, like you think of a sports star, that they can handle a football or a tennis ball better than anybody else for some reason. And they're elevated to such a position in our culture, isn't it? It's like the central part, if you turn on the news every night, and there's going to be a whole section about which sports stars have done what. There's nothing there about any other great personalities in this tradition. So we all accept certain authorities that we think are going to help guide our lives. Like when we talk, we accept authorities here. When the people come from outside to visit here, we talk of authorities. We have this line of authorities going back from Srila Prabhupada that we quote. And further back, these great souls in the tradition. So we accept authorities. But all the visitors who come here that we talk to, they all accept authorities also, don't they? That they've grown up hearing this or that. They have their view of how life works because of certain authorities that they've, either at school or somebody they admire or books they've read. So everyone accepts authorities. But these days, one of the great sources of authority that is all pervasive, it's at the background of what every young child is being taught, what we all grew up with, which is materialistic science or atheistic science. The whole paradigm of materialistic science is, it argues that everything in existence can be explained without the need to refer to a transcendent cause. That everything can be explained according to mundane laws. Here we're talking of Swayambhuva as a Prajapati, a progenitor. He's one of several personalities who have populated the universe. The Bhagavatam says that this is the basis of mankind. These great personalities produced offspring who went on to produce further offspring, and that's populated the planet. So this is completely heretical according to mundane science. The scientists are arguing, or trying to convince us, that somehow simple chemicals could combine just by chance with no plan, and somehow or other life springs into being. As time has gone on, it's getting harder and harder for them to argue this. In fact, even now I think it's already caught up with them that there's not a scientist on this planet who's arguing, yes, we can explain how life came about from chemicals. Their latest idea I heard is that, well, it probably came from outer space. But actually, Prabhupada always argued, which is like back in the 70s or the late 60s, this was so controversial, so revolutionary. Prabhupada always argued, life only comes from life. We even hear that the fossil record is supposed to support this materialistic viewpoint, yeah? That they argue, well, but actually, the more the time has gone on since this sort of atheistic science viewpoint came into being 2 centuries ago, the fossil record, even that is getting harder for them to, because like there's supposed to be all these little creatures, one developed, simple, one develops into another one, develops into another one, develops into another one. But there's no record like that. What there is in the fossil record is a record of living entities just appearing fully formed. Like for gazillions of years, the planet apparently went on with simple life forms, but then all of a sudden there's this time of creation. What's it called? The Cambrian era. When all these creatures, developed creatures, just pop into existence. There's no record of ancestors of them. They all just pop into existence fully formed. There's a book that one of our devotee scientists did years ago called Forbidden Archaeology. And just one example I could give from that book, there are so many, but there's one example that the devotee gives where back in the 19th century when they were digging for coal, and we understand coal is very, very old, yeah? It was plants and what have you from millions of years ago that were just compressed until it becomes coal. So somehow or other, amongst these layers of coal, they find a crystal goblet. How does that come about? What technology do you need to make crystal and then to form it into a goblet? But have you ever heard about that? Any book that you grew up with in science when you're a student, it's not mentioned. because these things don't fit with that mundane paradigm, so they're actually conveniently hid. There was even a show in America talking about these origins, alternative theories of origins of life. And there was some evidence that one of the universities held that is physical evidence of this sort of contrary theory that we're talking about. And the people who were going to do this show wanted to show that evidence, wanted to present it, because it doesn't fit with this theory of mundane science. And the universities tried to stop them legally from even using that evidence. They wouldn't lend it to them, they wouldn't show it to them. They knew that the university was holding whatever it was. So actually it went to the Supreme Court or something like that in America, which had to force the university by law, yes, you must allow them to look at this evidence. So we can see this idea that science is completely open, it's not true. They have a vested viewpoint where they've put all their faith into that viewpoint and they don't want it disturbed. So the conclusion, the sort of outcome of that atheistic science is that life has no real meaning. Yeah? If chemicals just came into existence by random combination and developed into something, then you're just a bunch of random chemicals, so there's no meaning to human life. This is completely contrary to what Srila Prabhupada taught us, what he brought to us. When I first heard Srila Prabhupada lecture, he really pushed this point that human life is really special, isn't it? We can understand that. When you look around, as nice as your dog might be, or your cat, or your pet budgie, or whatever, you can see human life has qualities that no other creature possesses. This idea, or this capacity for reflection, for looking internally. I like to give the example when I'm talking to one of the guests. Think of a cat in a room. You throw a ping pong ball through the window. We know what the cat's going to do. He's going to have a great time with that ping pong ball. But he's not going to turn around and look behind him and go, oh, where did that come from? But that's something that as humans we do, automatically, intuitively. So Prabhupada emphasized that this human form of life is really valuable according to our spiritual progress. It shouldn't be wasted. And in fact, that was Prabhupada's criticism of the Western culture, that more or less human life is just, 2 points for you. You grow up, you as a child you don't have much power, you do your thing as an adult, you try to scrape out what enjoyment you can, then you get old, more stupid and die. You achieve nothing. I heard Prabhupada giving a class recently where the theme of his class was movement. And I was thinking, well, on the planet at the moment, I should have probably got some figures, but like if you look every day on this planet, how many plane flights there are. There are tens of thousands, probably millions of people going from here to here at any one moment, isn't it? Flying from that country to that country. They're going on their yearly holiday or on whatever, a business trip. They're moving. But Prabhupada said human life is meant for a movement where consciousness advances. Like the prayer we begin class with, Om Aginatimanandasya Ginananjana Shalakaya. Chakshurun Militam Yanatajmai Shri Guruve Namaha. I was born into the darkness of ignorance. As a baby, what do you have knowledge of? Absolutely zero. All you're interested in is being fed. You have very limited, very small consciousness. And as we grow, this consciousness should develop. Actually, I mentioned the conclusion to atheistic science is that there's no real meaning to life. So even the United Nations recognizes that there's a worldwide epidemic, you could say, of mental distress, especially amongst young people. Because if you're told that your life has no real meaning, that's the basis of the science sort of viewpoint, then what do you see in the future as worth going on to? What do you see as worth trying to develop, apart from just struggling for sense gratification? Somehow there's, as a human, you know that there actually has to be some meaning behind this existence. We know that intuitively. So all of this, what we experience, our attachments, what the Shastras called, all of these attachments, this personal knowledge that we develop, contributes to a sense of self, who we think we are. Because all of this knowledge is sort of changing, then my identity of who I think I am, that's changing also. I heard it expressed recently in a class that we are prisoners of our own ego. Because of who I think I am, I accept some things, I reject other things. Based on this, Vedically it's called the false ego, ahankara. And that this false ego, this identity of who I think I am, it's taking me from body to body. Because of my material desires, well, I have to be given another material body, isn't it, to satisfy them. Even though I experience that my actions up to now to achieve happiness because of these samskaras, this conditioning that I've developed, it's failed so far. All my attempts at achieving satisfaction materially have failed, but still I stick to these futile, these ingrained habits. I think it was Bhaktivinoda Thakur who said that we have to be really careful with our habits. That you do something, according to your likes and dislikes, then the mind's going to latch onto that. It's going to want you to do it again if you got something out of it. And then those actions become habits. In the beginning, those habits, we don't even notice them. They fall on us, it's described as light as a cobweb. But that those habits over time become like chains. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur said we should develop habits, spiritual habits that are helpful to us. I heard someone giving class recently was saying that like when we're taking breakfast or whatever, we know how easy it is to get a stain on your clothing. You're having breakfast, suddenly there's a big lump of turmeric drops onto your top or whatever. And then we also know to get rid of that stain takes quite a bit of work. It doesn't wash off very easily. So he was saying we should be really careful about anything that's going to stain our consciousness, involving ourselves in anything that's going to create another samskara, another desire for the mind that wants to go on. So I was mentioning earlier about this, recommending from the scriptures that we follow these great Mahajans. Lord Chaitanya quotes a verse about Mahajans. He says, dry argument for the sake of arguing, are inconclusive. Someone can always come up with a different twist, a different argument. You can't achieve the truth by those just arguing. And a great personality, one of these munis or sages, he has to have an opinion that's different from others, or he's not considered a great sage. Even the Vedic literatures are so vast, they go in all different directions. It says, so simply by studying the Vedas, which are variegated, you can't come to the right path by which religious principles will be understood. Merely by Vedic study. The solid truth, though, of religious principles is hidden in the heart of an unadulterated, self-realized person. So, as the Shastras confirm, we should accept whatever progressive path these Mahajans advocate. I really like that line, that the solid truth of religious principles is hidden in the heart of a great devotee. This is a verse from the Mahabharata. Two of Swayambhuva Manu's sons are mentioned in today's verse, Priyavrata and Uttanapada. He also had 3 daughters, one of whom was Devahuti. It is described that these 2 kings, Uttanapada and Priyavrata, that these 2 kings were specifically empowered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When we hear, like for example, it's described that Priyavrata ruled the planet, but he also ruled the other planets. I remember hearing many, many years ago, Prabhupada was giving a class, I think in Melbourne, and he was talking about one of these great souls, a king, a Raja Rishi, who could rule the planet. And somebody objected, how can one person rule the planet? These days, politicians are lucky to get another 3 or 4 years. They've made such a mess of while they've been in power. So how could one person? So it's inconceivable to us in Kali Yuga how these great personalities could have done such things. In the Bhagavad Gita, we get information that Vaivashvata Manu, who is the Manu in this particular age, like Swayambhuva Manu, it's described he was a Manu back in Satya Yuga. That Vaivashvata Manu is the son of the sun god, and that his son, Maharaj Ikshvaku, ruled the planet. So these personalities, it's inconceivable. Like we said, anything that transcends the laws of material nature is described as inconceivable. But we are told by, I'm not sure if it's Jiva Goswami or Rupa Goswami, that the Supreme always remains inconceivable. That doesn't matter, your advancement as a devotee, the Supreme will always be inconceivable. Not that we don't have some experience of that Supreme, but the totality, you can only ever look at a little piece of whatever Krishna wants to display to us. Maharaj Priyavrata is described that he was entrusted by Swayambhuva for the responsibility of maintaining and protecting all the planetary systems. It's quite a job description. So, the story of Maharaj Priyavrata is that he was instructed by Narad Muni about the glories of spiritual life and don't become entangled. And so he'd sort of taken that path of remaining a brahmachari, remaining celibate, single monk. So Maharaj Parikshit in the Bhagavatam is astonished that Priyavrata could then go into household life. He was not only a self-realized soul, but a first-class devotee of the Lord. So the devotee has no mundane attraction for household life. Like most people on the planet are householders. But their experience of household life has nothing to do with spiritual life generally, isn't it? You're watching the kids grow up, you're saving up for another car, whatever, you're hoping for a holiday. But transcendence doesn't come into it. We are bound, in household life, we're bound up by the results of our fruitive activities. We're tightly bound. It's described the ignorance of self-realization is the greatest defeat in our human life, and that household life can be the perfect vehicle just to keep you distracted for the rest of your life. But for the devotees, we have that other option, that household life is also an ashram. Material householders is called griyamadis, yeah? But householders are called grihastas. That if we keep it sort of central in our consciousness that this is an ashram and that I can act accordingly, instead of just being lost in it, in household life, all the distractions that come along with it. But if I can maintain that idea that household life is an ashram, then it's described, family life can be compared to a fortress, learning to practice self-control. Priyavrata was faced with a dilemma, it's described, because he'd been asked by Lord Brahma to accept family life and the responsibility of ruling the kingdom. But Narad had advised him, don't enter household life. Don't become entangled in material affairs. So whose advice to accept? This is a puzzle for Priyavrata. Lord Brahma and Narad Muni are great authorities. So it's described that in this circumstance, in the verse that talks about that, the word manishaya, which means a higher intelligence, manisha. Lord Brahma and Narad Muni are both authorized to give instruction. So Priyavrata can't neglect either of them, but should use his intelligence to follow the advice of both of them. Rupa Goswami describes how this higher intelligence can work. So he says material vishayan, that is material affairs, because all of us have material affairs to deal with. You've got an income, if you're a household, you've got an income to make, you've got other people to deal with, all sorts of things, children, vishaya, material affairs. They should be accepted but without attachment. And everything can be dovetailed in that service to Krishna or the Supreme Lord. And he's described that is real intelligence on Manisha. Becoming a family man or a king is not harmful if we accept Krishna's advice. I was also thinking, so these great personalities, Swayambhuva, Priyavrata, Uttanapada, why are they of special interest to us, apart from they give us an example? The thing about them that makes them attractive and such wonderful models is that they have the welfare of others at heart. That Priyavrata ruled the planet with the welfare of others as his goal. We hear about the great acharyas in our line like Thakur Bhaktivinoda, Bhaktisiddhanta, and of course Srila Prabhupada. They all share this characteristic that at the center of their consciousness was the desire to help others, not to lord it over or gain any material wealth, anything like that, any power, but simply to try and use the great consciousness they had to help others. It's described the best way to purify our existence is to help others. When we help someone else, that person becomes pleased, and somehow innately we feel pleased when we help someone. So in Kali Yuga, which is described as an absolute ocean of faults, what can we do? Well, we've been gifted with that special mercy from the Gaudiya Brahma Vaishnava tradition, from Lord Chaitanya and his special followers. We've been gifted with the holy name. Even in our lifetime, we can see Kali Yuga is progressing. But if we hang on to the holy name, then spiritual life is guaranteed. Actually, I came across in various Vedic literatures, quite a few different Vedic literatures, the different, or the actual process, the steps that we should take to try and satisfy the Supreme Lord. Do this first, then that, do that. And all these different scriptures seem to come up with the same recommendation. They say, for example, in order to obtain the mercy of Lord Vishnu, satisfy the Vaishnavas. There is no doubt that by their mercy, Lord Vishnu will be pleased. Or from the Adi Purana, my dear Pata, those who claim to be my devotees are not my devotees, but those who claim to be claim to be the devotees of my devotees are actually my devotees. Or this is from the Padma Purana. One who performs worship of Lord Govinda but fails to worship his devotees should be understood to be not a devotee of the Lord, but simply a victim of false pride. One should always worship the Vaishnavas by all means, for by worshipping the great devotees, one is freed from all miseries. And one final one, this is from Baladev Vijayabhushana, and we know he was so dear, like Prabhupada dedicated his whole Bhagavad Gita to Baladev Vijayabhushana. He says, one may doubt whether the servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead will attain perfection. Maybe there's some doubt there. But there is absolutely no doubt that those who are attached to serving his devotees will attain perfection. One's mind is not as fully purified by serving the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord as it is by serving the feet of his devotees. If we cling to the holy name and the instructions from our acharyas, then we will be benedicted by this sublime process that we have been given. Hare Krishna. Anyone have anything they want to add? Something I've expressed wrongly?
Just a little comment, if with your permission, Prabhu. Srila Prabhupada was meeting with one of these Darwinistic scientists and having a discussion debate with him, and that went on for some time. And this man was trying to convince Srila Prabhupada that Srila Prabhupada's ancestors were monkeys. And this went, and at the end of it, Srila Prabhupada said to him, your ancestors might have been monkeys, but my ancestors were great sages, like we're hearing about now. And then Prabhupada said, the missing link is my foot on your head.
Yeah. Actually, I've heard that when Prabhupada met scientists, that if the scientist was a little humble in his position, that he was more than open with them. But sometimes these so-called experts, like there's a conversation with Prabhupada with a social scientist, whatever they're called, down in Melbourne. And Prabhupada's trying to talk to him. And the guy's like, no, that's not how we do things. There's a sort of arrogance that gets built in. And that sort of, like in class recently, Sita was talking about personal knowledge, that we gain knowledge individually along the way by different sources. And that we can become very attached to that. Sometimes you meet people here, visitors, and their sort of sense of who they are is really bound up. Like, if we don't have a sense of humility, then we can't change that sense of self, can we? Remember there's that description of when Sanatana Goswami meets Lord Chaitanya. And Sanatana was a great personality. He was like the chief minister of the Shah at the time. So you're talking someone way, way up in society. But he approaches Lord Chaitanya and he says, people say I'm a wise person, but he says, but I don't know who I am. So if we maintain that attitude of humility, then we can advance. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.